Happy Wednesday, everybody, and greetings from a snowy Boulder, Colorado. Thank you for joining this session. This is the fourth session that we have. I know everybody is going to say, "Wow, that was a fast 4 weeks, and why don't you do some more?" But maybe I will, and maybe I will in the future. So again, thank you to the Shift Spot session on the Revenue Enablement series. Again, this is the leadership and management driving success session. So that's what we're going to focus on today. And the agenda is as follows. We're going to do a brief summary from sessions 1, 2, 3. And one of the driving factors, or the driving factor I want to do that is, in case you were not able to participate in any of those, I think it's important, and I won't spend a lot of time on each one of those. I would encourage you to go back and listen to the recording or reach out to me directly on ShiftSpot if you've got some questions. But each one of those components are important and provide a foundation for what we're going to be talking about today and how to move forward in the future. There are the challenges facing the leadership and management team from revenue enablement. I want to talk about the team structure, the right people in the right seats, compensation planning, technology stack, objectives and key results, KPIs, what's next, and if there's time for Q&A. And I also want to reiterate that during the session, if you have questions, please stop me. No need to hold to the end of the session. So summary from session 1. Again, this is a foundation. I guess an analogy I like to use is, as you watch a building go up, it seems like it takes forever for that foundation to be in place and get the concrete poured, get the steel pieces of it in place. This is really what needs to happen from the foundational perspective. So defining your target market, which verticals do you want to be in, your ideal customer profile, your buyer personas, what does your internal team structure look like? And what that will do is it'll give you that foundation, or what I call the blueprint for success. Session 2 was all about marketing. So the marketing is, that's where your lead gen comes from. That's where your content comes from. But again, you can leverage what we did from the foundational component in session 1 of those key buyer personas, the target market, and then from there you get to develop your content. You want to do the tracking of campaigns and KPIs, and you'll hear me talk a lot about the KPIs or the OKRs, whichever. That in my opinion, they're kind of interchangeable. But if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And from a leadership perspective, you have to manage this to make changes and course correction. And that and the graph you see on the right-hand side of the slide, we went through the majority of those key components, such as website, such as SEO, such as analytics, such as marketing automation. We went through those in that session number 2. And what you're seeing here is a visual representation of your assessment. And this is where you can say, okay, wow, I need to improve in my in a lot of these areas in this case. So what this does is it sets a foundation to move forward from your marketing organization. So then in session 3, we talked about the sales and opportunity management. And what happens there is, okay, what are the results there? Is it's all about the decreased onboarding cycle, increased win rate, improved forecast accuracy, consistent quota integrity, deal revenue integrity. So all of those things are really important. And I was doing some research recently on these areas, and I came across this. If you could see that quote in the lower left, I thought that was pretty darn interesting. So again, look at that. With a defined sales process had 18% greater revenue growth than companies that did not. So in that session, we talked about the sales process, the sales methodology, the opportunity management, and we also talked about the ability to, if you just move the needle on your close rates by 5%, and if you've got a 6-month sales cycle, and let's just say $100,000 average selling price, you will create an additional 50% in revenue per rep. And again, this is the importance of the opportunity management and the sales process. So that was really session 3, which leads us now into, okay, I'm just going to talk a little bit about myself here. Won't spend much time, but it's like, okay, why should, what's my credibility? Why should you be listening to me? And I've been doing this for quite some time, and I'm still doing it. And I'm still very involved at the CRO level. So it's just, to me, this is, if you look at where I've been and what I've done, a lot of B2B, I've done some mergers and acquisitions, a lot of SaaS. So again, just kind of setting a foundation. So, why you might want to listen to me. This next one here, this customer lifecycle, this is, I keep repeating this, and why this is important. Again, as you can see, it's not the classic funnel as you may have seen in the past, but what we've got here is really, end to end, the full funnel. We talked about this in our previous sessions as well, and I'll continue to talk about this. This is, again, part of the foundational components that you really need to pay attention to. But the key takeaway here is that the revenue enablement leader has accountability and responsibility across the entire customer lifecycle. So they have to be from all the way from lead gen to account management, and have the associated resources to fulfill the components that equate to each part of these sections. So again, the selection is mostly sales, awareness and education is mostly marketing, onboarding and impact of your services and your CX folks, and your growth will probably be your CX and account management team. So what I want to dive into is, because we've labeled this, leadership and management, and there is a difference in the two, and I just want to spend a couple minutes talking about that. So I'm not going to read this because everybody can read it, but I think it's really important to understand the distinction between the two. This session is really not going to be focused on the philosophical discussion or around these two discussions. What is leadership and what is management, really? It's focused on the challenges that are going to be facing both. And I'm going to conflate these a little bit for this discussion today. Ken, I think we have our next, the next series in March is going to talk about more leadership and management. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct. Yep.
So again, the point of these next couple slides is really just say, okay, there is a difference. There's a significant difference, but today's revenue executive, they must have strong traits of leadership in both of these areas. And then, from a management perspective, there's a revenue operations component that will also assist in the delivery of the management. And we'll talk about that as part of the organizational structure. And again, just at a high level, that leadership is going to be inspire people, lead change, empower people, share the vision, right? And on the management side, it's much more so that management is focused on carrying out really 4 important functions. That function would be those functions would be planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. But again, the intent of these past couple of slides is just that there is a difference between leadership and management. As an executive or an owner or a founder of a company, it's imperative that you be aware of those differentials, but it's also really important to understand that the leader you have should have traits of both. And the discussion for today will really be around why it's important. And I will, like I mentioned before, kind of conflate those two for this discussion. So
let me ask question there, Jim. So when you look at a smaller business, let's say, a lot of times for the sales leader role, they have somebody that's either a player coach or they're starting to lead and manage, for the first time in their career or one of the first times in their career. And they may not be strong in the leadership category, but might have strengths in the management category. What challenges can that present, and how do you augment that? What are some thoughts to that? Because to go in and bring in a true CRO or leader, sometimes for a smaller business initially, they may or may not be able to do that. So what are your thoughts around that, out of curiosity?
Sure. So there's a lot of questions there, and hopefully I can remember most of them. Right. First of all, we haven't talked about that much in here, but there are fractional leadership offerings where you can get that level of support and very cost effective. But to directly address your question, at smaller organizations, yes, it is very unlikely that the sales manager will have significant leadership traits, because in a small company, again, that's a pretty expensive resource. Right. And I would say that especially as a member of ShiftSpot, that is in a smaller company, that ShiftSpot can provide some guidance and suggestions on how to work with that more. A less experienced, I guess I would call it, sales manager type position. You mentioned player coach. I've been doing this for a long time. That does not work. It just doesn't work.
100%. Yeah.
So let's just be clear about that. Do not do a player coach. Yeah. I mean, maybe you can only afford as a smaller company. Maybe you can only afford like the salesperson, and don't call that the sales manager, right? But if they've got the sales, and I think you've heard a lot that some of the best salespeople, they move them into the manager role because they're such a good salesperson, but they're horrible managers or they're horrible leaders. So but again, I think that the takeaway from that, Ken, is there are fractional executive options out there. I would say leverage the ShiftSpot, that community, for some guidance on how to work with a less experienced sales manager, and don't do the player coach.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I guess it would put more of the burden on the owner or the CEO to actually step into that leadership role until they can actually grow into it and augment that. Then
yes, it will.
Yeah,
yes, it will.
All right, perfect.
And that, as you can see, that's kind of working with the leadership and team. Leadership team and board. That's one of the issues here that faces revenue leadership, especially in these smaller organizations, right? So, and even in larger ones too. But I think more importantly is, how do you do the scalable, repeatable, predictable, and profitable revenue enablement? Right. And then, right people, right seats. We're going to talk about that. Compensation planning. Compensation planning is, I think you'll see that I've got a little bit different bent on this because of the revenue enablement organization. The compensation and bonuses should be tied to all components of the revenue enablement team. And I'm seeing that more and more within the marketplace, as well as my clients. And then obviously the time, or maybe it's not obvious, but to me, I see this time in and time again, as like, I can't hire good salespeople, and then I can't get them on board fast enough, right? Gotcha. So how do I do, what does that look like from a sales enablement perspective? So these are, again, we talked about challenges facing the sales, just sales. We talked about challenges facing the marketing. Well, there's challenges all through that customer lifecycle, but at the revenue leadership, here's the 5 that I see time in and time about. There's probably a list as long as your arm, but I think a lot of these can be rolled up into any of these, into these 5 areas here. So this is really the revenue enablement team structure. I've talked about this a little bit before, but I think that as we look at it, there's really 4 distinct components. So there's marketing that goes across the entire customer lifecycle, sales, and we've got, depending on your channels, depending on your size of the organization, you've got direct and channel. Also, there's depending on the size of your organization, again, and depending on your product, you may want to consider a sales development rep or business development rep to help, with lead qualification and let your, more experienced salespeople take it from once it's qualified through the deal. Now, customer success / account management, I think this is really important, especially if you've got a SaaS offering. But I could make the argument for professional services or any type of an organization, because these people that are doing retention, expansion, it's a different DNA than it is for your hunters, or so to speak. So this is more the hunter versus farmer. And then, as I mentioned earlier, your revenue operations or sales enablement, the revenue operations will do some of the management components. So the tech stack management, they can do the training, they can do the onboarding, and I'll unpack that a little bit here shortly.
Okay, perfect.
So again, these are the 4 key components that I recommend for your revenue enablement structure, and they all they all report up to that revenue enablement leader, right? So that's the accountability and the responsibility. All those groups report up into that revenue enablement leader. In a small organization, you're like, wow, does that mean I need a CMO, a chief sales officer, a VP of marketing, VP of customer success? The answer is, I recommend no. Again, you probably have, and we'll talk about the resources here actually in the next slide. But you probably have maybe director levels or maybe a sales manager level, but that a lot of that is going to be driven by the size of your organization and the revenue components that you're looking for.
Okay.
So resources, you're like, okay. Yes, this is the first question, is like, especially if you're a small organization, you're like, holy, what? I've got, there's a lot of people in here, right? But as you look at this, and then, we talked about this and these resources, most of these resources in our prior sessions, but from marketing, perhaps that, again, depending on the size of your organization, you have the internal versus external conversations. So maybe you only have, a general marketing resource that can do SEO, SEM, social, or you might want to bring in an agency to help with that, with your marketing, which I've found that if you work pretty closely with agencies, you can get cost effective as opposed to try and stack your team with a whole bunch of marketing folks. But that's something that you want to evaluate closely and carefully. Also the selling resources too. So the SDRs or BDRs, sales development reps, business development reps, sales, both direct and channel, and then revenue operations. So you have CX stands for customer experience. Apologize for not spelling that out, but customer experience and account management, revenue operations, and then the sales enablement and training is a whole nother area. If you're looking at a lot of the press, you've probably seen, a whole bunch of information about sales enablement. To me, I'm not that fond of the term because everything should be sales enablement at the end of the day, right? So, but I think that as you look at training and onboarding and ongoing training and that you have to have some resources, again, internal versus external. So I would say a key takeaway of this is, yes, it's a lengthy resource list that, everybody on there has to be hired, trained, managed, motivated, and compensated correctly. So as you look at, okay, what does my organization look like? at that, you really need to say, okay, and how does that overline with budget, right? I mean, that's always a key component too. So how do you figure out, okay, here's my budget, here's my revenue, and I can't afford, 8, 9, 10 resources, but maybe I can afford one resource here and outsource some of my marketing or outsource some of my training. So there's a lot to take a look at here, but your organization size typically will drive the number of resources, especially relating to marketing, SDRs, and sales enablement.
Yeah.
So
As far as the budgeting is kind of remembering some of those parameters that you set last week or the week before, what were those just for the folks that might be dialing into this session?
sure. So in general, the revenue operations and revenue enablement, and I'm going to combine all, sales, marketing, and the revenue ops. And your answer, Ken, that is somewhere between 18 and 24%. The higher end is for growth companies, even smaller companies too. So, it is not, and that does include the technology stack as well, which we'll talk a little bit about that here shortly. So, but again, it's in that, and it's about maybe 50-50-ish between marketing and sales. So maybe like 9 to 10% for marketing and 9 to 10% for sales / account management, revenue ops.
Yeah. Okay.
But there's also, but if you look at it, training can be expensive. Again, just depends on the size of your team. And that's why I'm like, I would encourage you to look at, if you have, less than, I don't know, even 10 or less, you probably want to do for your training, you probably want to take a look at outsourcing that, quite frankly.
Got it. Okay.
So the right people in the right seats. You've heard me talk about this before, right? But this is so important and such a key challenge, in my opinion, for the for the revenue enablement leader, right? Because you have to look at, when I talk about assessments, you have to look at your current team, right? You can't just say, and when I talk about this, I mean your current marketing team, right? Are they hitting their deliverables, such as content? Is their content getting consumed by not only your prospects but by your sales team, right? What as my okay, my salesperson isn't at their quota. Why aren't they at the quota? What are the reasons for that? So you need to start, unpacking that. And there's a bunch of these assessments out there, whether it be predictive index, Wonderlic, DISC, objective management group, right? It doesn't, I mean, I don't really care, but what I get from a lot of my clients is it worth doing on the hiring side and the development side? My answer is, if you've got more than, the short answer is yes. But if you've got, certainly if you've got, a total of let's say between 5 and 6 resources, that includes marketing and sales. How are you going to do your assessments of how these people are doing? I mean, sales is a little bit easier, obviously, right? They're either a quota or not, but I don't think it's quite that binary. And then, if I look at the hiring, how do I hire my people? Do I use recruiters? I mean, if I'm going to use recruiters, I've got to have some sort of a budget for that, right? Even if I use internal recruiting, is that going to be my HR? How much work is done from that too? So again, if this is only 4 bullet points here, but each one of these is a significant effort that needs to be addressed. And when I talk about onboarding, what so many times I've seen, when I come into my clients or in past lives, or working with people, we're working with organizations, like, okay, what is your 30, 60, 90 plan? And that's for much more than the salespeople as well, right? I mean, that should be for anybody you bring on, and maybe a BDR is only a 60-day plan before you ramp them up, right? But marketing should also have that, and then that ties into what am I doing from a training or a sales enablement? We talked about this a little bit in the past slide. Is do I want to do it internal versus external?
Yeah, something to add, just I'm sure you know this, but for our listeners out there and some of the owners in the community, Assessments are great. I preach them. I love to use them, but we want to be cautious in how we do it and utilizing assessments, because it's a little known fact, but not hiring somebody because of an assessment, a behavioral assessment of sort, can actually get you in legal trouble. So I'd be cautious not to go to somebody and say, hey, wanted to hire you, but your disc did not come back the way we wanted for you to be in sales.
Oh, yeah, that's a very good point. I should have mentioned that.
Yeah.
Do not use it as I've seen people, do not use it as a be all end all. What I want for hiring, if I see an assessment, that helps me guide my interviewing question, right? And then, from that's what I would say to use it for. Yeah, because to your point, I have seen people that and I've cautioned those executives to say, if you use that, you have to be very careful in your communication if you're using that as your true guide to go to a next step or not, right?
Yeah. And you can use it for your questioning. So somebody is a high D, like me, which I'm very direct and assertive, right? You could utilize that to formulate some of your questions.
Correct.
How they would do, and if they would rub people wrong or whatever, right? So you can use that in your questioning, but I just want to, caution people on how they use them.
Correct. And if we look at training, and I think that that kind of leads me into this next slide. And I know it's a little bit of an eye chart, or maybe a lot of an eye chart, and you have the first 4 weeks here, right? So that's the first 30 days, and you just kind of build on top of that. But there's a couple other categories in here, but you can see are there assets available to help them train? If you look at even week 2, there's I've got some participate in the weekly sales calls, introduction to value propositions, CRM training. Your target accounts, right? So the moral of the story here, the key takeaway again is there a plan in place, and who is managing the plan, right? Because again, as we all heard, bad hires are very expensive, and you can really tell in a 30-60 day, are they meeting these goals? I mean, there's role plays in here, there's interactions with other salespeople, there's interactions with marketing. I like there's listening in onto discovery calls from other reps. So it's a pretty darn detailed plan that I would encourage, irrespective of the size of the organization, even if the founder has to do this with his single selling resource, make it happen.
Yeah.
If there's not a clear, distinct plan, you're not going to have a clear, distinct outcome. Well, yeah, you will have an outcome, and the outcome is going to be less than desirable.
Yeah, the outcome may not meet your expectations, but
correct.
Look at ourselves once that happens. So
yes, and the other thing too is when we talk about content and sales enablement, we talked about content and marketing. This will also assist you in building some of that content. You can see that in this case, there was a lot of available content, and what it does when I go through this too, set these plans up. I'm like, we don't have some content here, so you want to work with your marketing organization to create some training content, or your training organization to create the training content as well. Right.
Cool.
Okay. So now the fun part, right? The compensation planning. This could be an entire session in and of itself, and to try and boil it down into 5 or 10 minutes is a little bit challenging, but I'll do my best here. So I think you have to start with what are the attainable revenue goals, and we're talking about for the entire organization. So let's say I've got a $5 million bogey, right? Well, I think everybody across the entire revenue enablement has to have skin in the game. So what does that mean? So skin in the game for marketing means, you've done this work before to set up your marketing organization. So their KPI is probably going to be, marketing qualified leads, how much, good content, right? And this is also some of a challenge where I've seen with the leaders of the organization. saying, okay, great, you got a $5 million quota, but you've only got 4 salespeople with $1.25 million quotas each, right? Well, that's not going to work. You're not going to see each of those salespeople hitting 100%, right?
Right.
So there's what's called an over assignment, and this may be a term that people are familiar with. So
I
let's
would say honestly, a lot of owners, I mean, are not familiar with that.
okay.
So actually, I would talk a little bit about that and maybe some of the best practices. At least the companies I've worked with, they struggle and they're like, well, wow, we just lost a sales rep. I don't know how we're ever going to hit our numbers this year, right? And the sales team has 10 million in quota and the company has 10 million in quota. But yeah, that I would actually explain that a little bit.
Sure. Happy to unpack that. Let's take your example of let's say we've got a $10 million nut, right? And I've got 10 salespeople with $1 million each, right? So and my recommendation is you want an over assignment to the VP level of at least 15%, and maybe in general 20%. So what does that mean? So that means that that I'd really have 10 salespeople that had $1.2 million of quota for a total quota of 12 million. So you need an over assignment in that 20 to 25% range.
Okay.
Because I think because to your point, Ken, if with 10 salespeople, you're probably gonna lose one. You're probably only gonna have 7 that are at quota, right? So I mean, as you plan quotas, I think that the kind of the magic number is, I don't know what you've seen, but the magic number I've seen is you have maybe 75% quota attainment, right?
Yeah.
Total.
Yeah.
So
right.
this is why, if you do 75 and 25, that's that with the over assignment there, that you should be able to hit your revenue goals, right?
Right.
So, okay, if you have no over assignment at 10 million, you're not going to make your number. I can tell you that right now. Oh,
Yeah.
well, I would say the probability of making that number is incredibly low.
Yep. Agreed.
Incredibly low. So again, the concept of over assignment is just increase your target revenue by 20 to 25% and pass that over assignment to the reps. Does that answer your question?
Yep, definitely does. Appreciate it. Just mitigates the risk for the owner, right? So
that's a good way to put it. Yep. So for marketing, what I like to do is have a bonus compensation tied into their plan, because this is not a shot at any CMO, but as I said, in both the CMO seat and the chief marketing officer seat and the chief sales officer seat, it's rare that the chief marketing officer gets fired for not meeting their quota, right? But I would say that why not create some sort of a bonus structure tied into the overall revenue goals, right? So if you exceed your lead goals and exceed your revenue attainment from the team, that you should be bonused accordingly. And what that specific looks like is that is probably, again, in that maybe 10 to 15% overall bonus. But as you're building your financial compensation models, I'm recommending you keep that in mind, so you know what that looks like. So sales is typically pretty darn easy, right? You count them on net new logos for salespeople, whether that's channel or indirect. But one of the takeaways here that I'd like to mention is I'm a big fan of tiering compensation. So what does that mean? So let's say the quota is $1 million, and at 100% of quota they get 10%. I'm just going to make these numbers up, right? So 10%. So at 50% of quota, they should not be getting 10% of their, they should not be receiving the quota compensation levels at 50% of quota that they get at 100% of quota. That's what I mean by having tiered compensation. So it may, if they're fit, and I also advocate that if they're below 60% of revenue attainment, they don't get any compensation. They don't get any commission. They don't get any commission, and then it's tiered accordingly. And then if they exceed their quota, you also have it maybe tiers at 110% of commission, 115% of commission. So again, that's what I mean by tiered commission. So for CX and account management, for what the things you want to focus on is you want to focus on account growth. And when I talk about account growth, that's net new revenue within an account. For SaaS, it's renewal, but there should be renewal and account growth in that as well. And then you want to try, you want to minimize your churn. And in the SaaS world, it's pretty easy to turn on, and it's almost as easy to turn off too. So you want these people focused on how you can reduce the churn as well as growth, right? So it's a little bit of a balancing act. So that's why I advocate, even in smaller organizations, that maybe one of your professional service or delivery folks moves into that account management role. And also that may be a good path for that account manager to go into a sales role as well. So you have some account growth and some account promotion from that CX, possibly from the CX to the salesperson too. And you could have a similar model if you have a BDR, that those BDRs may be able to train to salespeople, but that could be a little tricky. And then if we look at revenue operations, these people are, they could be involved in training, they could be involved with a technology stack. But there again, I think there's a bonus tied to overall revenue enablement to have everybody pulling in the same direction. So kind of the the key takeaway here is this is really compensation drives behavior. People always make I don't know if it's making fun, but the comment is, yeah, salespeople are coin driven, right? And that's okay. That's not a bad thing, because a lot of them are motivated, in fact, by making making their comp plans and making good money. But I think if everybody it gets a bonus for overall revenue attainment in addition to the salespeople, that makes for a lot tighter organization in general.
Yeah, just a couple other real quick best practices that I like to see in sales compensation plans specifically is, don't do anything in perpetuity, right? So meaning that I see a lot of owners say, hey, if you come on board and work with us, we'll pay you 10% of everything. Well, guess what? This year, maybe your average deal is, $500, but then you start to build things up, and then suddenly your average deal is $500,000. Do you really want to pay out that amount? Do you need to pay out that amount? So, I'd say that's one thing. And then another thing is, annualize it, right? Make it flexible, so every year the company can adjust the compensation plan based upon the needs of the compensation plan. And then another thing, I like to advise is have some fine print in there that says the company may adjust and tweak the compensation plan as it deems and sees necessary, right? Doesn't mean that we're doing it every week or every month, but if some weird anomaly happens or we acquire somebody or whatever, we need an out to absorb that and address that. So those are some other things that I like.
Yeah, and I mean, I wouldn't say it's even such fine print either, right? But you want to have some stability in your compensation plans too, on the other hand, right?
Right.
But that reminds me that you also have, okay, for these SaaS deals, do you bonus them in years 2 or 3? Let's say they sign a 5-year contract, would you bonus the salesperson for all 5 years? In general best practices, the answer is no.
Right.
You might want to, let's say your typical contract is 3 years and they sign a 5-year, then I think something like that, you could put some extra bonus, maybe a small percentage in year 2 or year 3 too. So
yeah,
like I said, there's, we could continue to talk about this for kind of the rest of the day almost, right? So, but yes, you need to change it. I do make all of mine on, an annualized basis. I do quarterly reviews as well. So
cool. Awesome.
Okay. Now the fun part, right? the technology. So in here, we talked a little about our CRMs. Last time we talked about don't overcomplicate it, right? But I think that, and here's another chunk that can add up to a lot of money, right? So this is really a challenge, I think, for smaller organizations. But I think that, there's some pretty good solutions out there. You see HubSpot on here several times, and as I mentioned last time, and I'll mention this time, that I don't care as much what it is, as long as you're utilizing it, and more importantly, as long as it's a tool for the salespeople.
Yep.
We're talking about KPIs here for the leadership team, but if it's not easy for the salesperson, you're as a revenue leader, you're going to get trash out of there as well, right?
Yeah.
So, but I think if you said, okay, as a smaller organization, I certainly have to have, my website, the CMS around the website. I've certainly got to have some sort of a CRM and probably some sort of a marketing, right? And I've seen, companies that have just got a Series A or a Series B be overly enamored with the sales, with the technology pieces of it, and think the technology is going to do all the selling for them, right? That is also a recipe for disaster.
Yep.
And then you have to have somebody that supports this technology too, as importantly, right? And in a small organization, who does that? Maybe you've got some IT guy that does that. I mean, I'm a little bit of a technology geek, so I like to keep my pulse on, some of these technologies, and I can configure some of those. But once you get more than like 5 or 6 salespeople, that just you need to look at, and in your marketing people, you need to look at a resource to help manage that, right? And it comes up to be a pretty big chunk of money. But I found another interesting survey from Bain around CRMs. It says, according to Bain and Company, 62% of the survey respondents said their ROI on their CM fell short of expectations, right? Yeah. Oh, that's just the CRM, but that is, a very important and critical component of your technology stack. So again, the takeaway is, there's a couple of key takeaways. First of all, don't get, you hear this everything about sales, artificial intelligence and lead generation. You just need to be, as a sales leader, you need to be very cognizant about that spend, the amount of time that you need to keep maintaining it, right? And the utilization by your team, right? Both the sales, marketing, and account management team, right? Don't overcomplicate it, but you have to have some components. So, I've seen some great, sales engagement like Outreach or Sales Loft work really well, right? But I would also make the argument that you can probably get, a lot of that through HubSpot as well, where you just eliminated another technology component. So, spend the time, to really to look at the existing technology stack and to make decisions, because at the end, if we do have time, I love to cycle through a couple of these G2 graphs where they have there's like literally dozens of each one of these areas that you can choose from, right? Right. Dozens, and it's like, okay, what works best for me? So again, take the time to evaluate. If you've got somebody in revenue operations, what are their skill sets? Are their skill sets in outreach? Are their skill sets in Gong or Course, right? So it's kind of, connecting all these dots is not easy. So, but it's
and to add to that CRM expectations stat that you gave, in my opinion, the two primary reasons people don't meet their expectations are that, one, they have no strategy to go through change management and adopt and this new application, regardless of what it is, CRM, ERP, right? So they're lacking from that. And two, they didn't really do a very good job of gathering the business requirements and executing the business requirements in a methodical way where it had all the key stakeholders involved, right? So I think too many people, they get the CRM and they're like, hey, let's just roll it out. Oh, it's easy. Hey, sales guy, go do this. Go do that. And then they're wondering, like, why is our adoption rate low? Why do I not get the reports I want and everything? So those are the two things I've seen that lead to failure and missed expectations.
Yeah, I didn't, it's kind of hard to mush all this down into an hour when almost every one of these slides could cover, an hour. But to your point about change management and the business requirements, right? And getting, I don't want to get like all stakeholders involved, right? But you certainly need, who's going to be your end user, how does marketing use it? So that's a good point, is like the business requirements. And then if you are making a change, how do you make that change effectively, right?
Yeah. And all these CRMs have a some sort of template to help you onboard and draw out the requirements as well. So just a lot of people don't use it.
So. Yeah. And for those who are using other CRMs, if they're not on there, that wasn't a purposeful omission, right? Like I said, I could have, this could be filled with it. And like I said, if we have a couple minutes at the end, I'll just show you. I showed them in the last time. We were like, holy cow, there's that many of those out there.
Exactly.
The answer is yes, there are. So we talked, I want to go KPIs, right? Talk a little bit about the KPIs, and in that same HBR article, I kind of like some of these quotes because it's just not me saying it, right? So 44% of executives think that their organization is ineffective in pipeline management. 44% of executives.
That's insane.
It is. It's like, and so I talked earlier about the challenges of the revenue enablement leader, right? Is like, okay, how can you convince those 44% that you do know what you're talking about? Your team is doing the right things, right? You are following the methodology and the sales process and the lead process. But I think, Ken, you and I were talking about leading indicators and lagging indicators last time. So I actually wanted to kind of highlight that because I think it's pretty important, right? So, what are, a couple examples are number of new MQLs per week, marketing qualified leads, number of new contacts and meetings and target accounts, number of new qualified opportunities per month. Those are really leading indicators. And people say, well, we've had hundreds of people visit our website, and I'm like, well, that's nice, but how many MQLs did that give you? So that is, to me, that's a vanity metric that's somewhat useful, but not helpful, right? So and then lagging indicators are looking deals closed per month, time to quota for new selling resources. Those are lagging indicators. And there's a lot more, right? And these CRMs that we talked about, this is just the one on the left is just here's the current forecast quarter opportunity based on where we are in the sales cycle, right? So this ties into, as the revenue leader, you look at inspection, right? So like, geez, I've got all these that are in stage 2 of the technical call, and a couple of these have been here for a lot longer than we normally see, right? So that comes back to how do you manage the pipeline? That has to do with your how you're coaching people, what you're doing for your weekly cadence, how you're looking at that, right? And then you also want to look at maybe previous quarter and current quarter converted leads, right? So that's a kind of a laggy metric, but a very important metric too. So I think that's again, that takeaway is, okay, you as the revenue enablement leader want to make sure that all your executives strongly believe, and you've shown that you can effectively manage your pipeline and how you do that.
Yep.
So kind of as we come to the summary of this particular session. Sorry. Oh, there's one more thing here. I love these HBR things. So sorry about that. I was just looking at my notes, and here's another good one too. So companies with effective pipeline management and an average growth rate of 5.3%, a 15% increase over companies that don't use effective pipeline management. So 15% greater increase of people with effective pipeline management over companies that don't.
Yeah.
So these know, and then the companies that master these pipeline practices, 28% higher revenue growth. This is from HBR.
Wow.
So this is why you'll hear me talk about this time and time again. So, okay, as the revenue leader, where do I ask myself these questions? And even as the founder for the smallest organizations, like we referred to before, is your annual revenue plan realistic? I've seen some CEOs that say, okay, I've got to have this much revenue. And I'm like, okay, I'm happy for you, but I'm sorry, we don't have the resources or capabilities to sell that. It's going to be contentious, but I've walked away from these things because you're setting not only you up for failure, but everybody on your team, right? I mean, you want to set there's a difference between realistic and a slam dunk, right, Ken? So, I mean, you want it to be a stretch, but you want to use some, the market trends and what you've done in the past and your quota assignments, right? But, you don't want to say, okay, I need this, but there's no way everybody's got to be at 110% of my quota to get there. It's just not going to happen, right? What level of support does revenue enablement, leadership have from the CEO and the CFO? Some of those numbers I just cited, if you do the foundational work that we've been talking about for the last month, you will have a very high level of support from the CEO and CFO. I can assure you of that. I mean, it's a lot of work to get there, but if you're doing sales process, MQLs, target markets, right, and you're doing all those things, I mean, there is no silver bullet. That I think we all know that now. But
a chessboard. It's a lot.
What's that, Ken?
I said it's a chessboard. There's a lot going on. You gotta
correct
tune all the pieces and parts to get the results you want. So
correct. The right resources in the right place, the technology stack, your KPIs and OKRs address leading and lagging indicators. And then, does your compensation plan, they drive success for the whole team?
Yeah.
So I think that's, without all these foundations in place, that the likelihood of overall success is quite low. With all that we put in, what we've talked about over the last 4 weeks, and if you only had a chance to join today, there's a couple summary slides in there, but I'm happy to, if you feel free to reach out to me on ShiftSpot, and happy to do a deeper dive sessions. But again, I think that in summary is the if you're looking at these, if you've done all your foundation work, it's not going to be easy, but at least you'll have a plan in place and the right resources to do that. And so your odds of success are much greater. So awesome. Ken, any questions? I'd like to wrap this up today.
No. I mean, this was outstanding, Jim. I mean, like you said, there's a lot of topics here that we could go in even much deeper. I wouldn't mind actually, doing a podcast or two on some of these topics that you might be really passionate about and talking through them even deeper on specific areas, right? So
I'd be happy to do that, and I hope it comes across that I'm pretty passionate about this.
Yeah, it definitely does.
I even had hair at one point in time when I started doing this. so
well, listen, you're a valuable asset and team member in the ShiftSpot community. We appreciate everything you do, and excited to grow this thing with you. And for the founders and CEOs listening or log in here and take a look, please ping Jim in the community or externally as well. And appreciate everything you bring to the table, Jim.
Okay, thank you, Ken.